Hi everybody, I'm Dana Scheider, and I want to welcome you to my new video series on how to work through a new code base that you haven't worked with before to fix a bug. I've chosen an open source project to do this with. It's dev.to, which is an online community or a website where different developers can go on and share their blog posts and just connect with other developers. So if you haven't seen it, I recommend checking it out. This is an open source code base, and so if you don't know anything about open source contributions, I actually have a conference talk called Beginner's Guide to Open Source that goes over some of the basics of how open source projects and open source contributions work. So if you're curious about that aspect, go ahead and look for it. It's not on this channel, but a few conferences have posted the video. It's called A Beginner's Guide to Open Source. So if you're interested, check it out. A little caveat, well, a couple caveats. First of all, there are several tools that I'm going to be using in this video that I'm not going to spend a lot of time explaining. The first ones are Ruby and Rails. Ruby and Rails are a prerequisite for this video. If you've never worked with them before, you'll want to come back to this after you've done that. You don't have to know much, but you do have to know something about Ruby on Rails. Other tools that I'm going to be using include Spec, test-driven development, Git, RVM, the Ruby version manager, Postgres SQL, the database, Redis will come up in this. Those we won't spend too much time on, but if you see stuff that you haven't been exposed to, just do your best to push on through. Being confused is a common thing for developers at all levels, and especially juniors. So one of the skills that you're going to want to learn is how to kind of push on through that and develop an understanding as you go. The other thing is that since I also haven't worked with this code base much, I may be confused. So if you're feeling like you don't quite get it, don't take that to heart too much. It's just kind of a challenging thing for everyone. The second caveat is kind of on the tail of that. Don't necessarily believe everything I say. I probably say some things in these videos that are wrong. Every software development process starts with a hypothesis as to what the problem might be or what a solution to it might be, and those hypotheses often turn out to be wrong. So watch the whole video and don't necessarily get hung up on any particular thing I say. My goal for this video is to get you through the entire software development process and just kind of see the whole messy thing, how a developer works through a new code base, from looking through the code itself to Googling to StackOverflow to dirty hacks and all the things that happen in a software developer's life. So yeah, I hope you enjoy these videos. There are a few of them, and at each one I say it's going to be the last, and usually that turns out not to be true. So yeah, I hope you enjoy this. Feel free to ask questions in the comments, and do read the description of the video because there are some materials in here that'll really help, especially any documentation that I put in there. And I think that's everything. So without further ado, let's start working. That I got for us to work on. What happened here is that they received a Honey Badger. Honey Badger is a monitoring tool with this error. You can see that it says raise standard error, invalid username if user.nil. So that implies that something happened where the user was nil. So this find by username failed to come up with a record. So the thing that's happening here, sorry, wrong tab, we got too many tabs open. So the thing that's happening here is that in a community like this, users will come and go, delete their accounts, and sometimes there are still resources that refer to those users. In this case, it's going to be this embedded tag, which I'll show you in a minute. I did ask some questions to clarify the issue with the maintainers. The issue is linked in the description of the video, so you can feel free to peruse these comments. This guy was able to suggest an approach. He actually did a little bit of work on this already, so the first thing that I want to do is kind of compare the stuff that he did. So you can see this is the method where the error is happening. Previously it had this raise standard error, and he changed it to just return the username if the user is nil. Now the maintainers didn't like that approach, and the reason is because this method here, parse username to user, the way that he implemented it, if you find a user, then a user object is returned, and if you don't find a user, then a username string is returned. And in general, it's not good practice to have methods return different types of objects unless one of them is nil, because it just makes it a lot harder to reason about what kinds of methods you can call on whatever it returns or what you can do with that data. So the maintainers are suggesting a different approach, and the one that I arrived at after discussing with them a little more is not quite what Citizen 428 here is suggesting, but is similar, kind of along the same lines. So let's kind of look at the code. The first thing I want to do is show you what this is supposed to be doing and what it actually looks like. So the first thing that we're going to do, I said that I was totally unfamiliar with this code base and this issue, and that's mostly true, but I did do some poking around because it took a while to figure out where this code is actually getting used and how we're actually going to be working with it. So now the first thing that I did to look for this was I went to routes.rb and looked at liquid. So that was actually not the first thing I did. If you're wondering how I got there, the way that I did it was that I searched for liquid throughout the code base. So I just searched for liquid here, found out that there was a liquid embeds controller, and then I went back to routes.rb because every controller is going to have some corresponding line or lines in routes.rb indicating which routes get sent to that controller. So I went to routes.rb, looked at liquid embeds, looked for liquid, found liquid embeds show, and it looks like the route to get there is embed/embeddable. So let's take a look at this liquid embeds controller. The liquid embeds controller has only a show method, and there we go. And this is the view that gets rendered when that route gets visited. So in this case, from reading the liquid docs that I linked in the video description, I know that this in this case should be user because that's the name of our user tag. So I know that that's supposed to be user, and then this is going to be the arguments, in this case the username, that get passed into that template. So Liquid is a templating library. Liquid takes these takes these tags and then renders them with particular data that you decide to pass in. And dev.to uses Liquid because it enables users to customize their profiles in certain ways that would not be possible or would not be as easy with standard Rails views. So that's kind of the background on what's happening here. I got this up and running on my local. So I can go to not that. That would be the production site. And I'm going to just do this for my user to show you. Well, I'll do it for a different user so we can see what happens. Now my user's fine. /user, and then the username, or no, it's called args equals Dana Scheider. I wonder why that happened. Oh, because I did embeds and it's embed. There. So this is what this is the view that we're actually working with. And I'm pretty sure that how this is used in the context of the app is that this is a little partial view, obviously, not a whole view of the site. That I think the front end fetches the rendered template under certain circumstances instead of this getting rendered as part of a page. And then React can use it as a component. In any case, I hope that's not a confusing amount of detail. So now let's see what happens when we use a user whose username doesn't exist. So we get an error, which presumably when the front end makes this request, it handles this error somehow gracefully. So essentially this is the problem that we're looking to solve, though. We want to make sure that this is handled gracefully so that this nasty error doesn't happen. So looking back, let's look at the code. So here we have UserTag, which is a subclass of liquid tag base. Liquid tag base is a subclass of liquid tag with a couple of methods that presumably are going to be used in multiple subclasses. So we've got, for a liquid tag, you need to have two methods. You need to have an initialize method and a render method. And this is all information that I got from the docs that are in the description. So the initialize method has to take the tag name, which is user. It has to take the user, which is actually a string username. And then it has to take this tokens arg, which is a liquid tag specific thing. Now in the render, you can see that it calls this action controller base render to string, and it uses this partial view. Can't type today. So that's not super important to look at all the code there right now. And so there are a couple things that you notice here. First of all, it assigns this @user instance variable to the output of this parse username to user method. So the first thing this does is try to find the user by the username. That makes sense. And return that user. But if the user isn't found, then it raises this error, which causes the error that we saw in Chrome. Now, the suggestion that was put forward in the other pull request was that instead of using a user object, we might use this open struct object that contains certain data. However, going back to a conversation I had with the maintainer Molly this morning, it looks like it might be a better approach to use an actual user object that just isn't populated with data and has a stock username. So let's just kind of see how this works. We're going to do this with a test first approach. So if you haven't used RSpec before, try to just follow along here. I'm not going to go into a whole lot of detail about how to use RSpec, but the spec in question, well, let's start by running the specs, and I'll just run this one. Hopefully this works. I haven't run these. In case you're wondering, this BE is my alias for bundle exec. I keep forgetting to not use the aliases in here. So sorry about that. The real command would be bundle exec rspec, etc. So okay, so these passed. The spec in question is going to be this one. It rejects an invalid ID code, and by ID code it means username. I'm not sure why that term ID code is being used here. So what this spec is doing is it's taking this generate user tag method, which is defined up here, and it's saying that when the template is parsed, that error should be raised, just like we saw in this code here. We want to change that behavior. So let's, instead of using this spec, let's do another context block. Oops. Whoops. And that did something weird. Editor bugs. Let's see. Let's see, what do I want to call this spec? I'm given an invalid ID code. We don't want to check that it doesn't raise an error. That would be the obvious one. But checking that it doesn't raise an error is a little bit of an anti-pattern, because you never know what the error might be that it's raising. And so it can be kind of a catch-all where it catches all, where it makes sure it doesn't raise errors even if those errors kind of should have been raised. So that's a pattern that I try to avoid. when given an invalid ID code, so testing, the difficult thing about testing, one of the difficult things about testing is that this is the stage where you're settling on requirements. So missing username. Oh, I guess this update ends my blocks for me, this VS Code update. So we're gonna follow the same and we're gonna say that we want it to do that instead, just for now. We may add more tests for this later. So now we run this test, we expect it to fail. This is a typical test-driven development pattern. Whenever you write a test, you want to write the test before you write the code, so that you can see that it fails. Because if you don't see that it fails, there could be an error with the test that makes it pass permanently, and so you really need to know that ahead of time. So that failed just as expected. That's a good thing in this case. So let's see, UserTag. Let's go back here. And let's go and then we're gonna just delete all of that. See what happens there. Interesting. So undefined method for nil class. So this is happening because the user does not have an ID. And this is happening in the user decorator. So one pattern that's being used here, you can see in the render method that user is set to @user.decorate. So that's this user that gets found down here. And when you call .decorate, what that does in Rails is it creates an instance of this user decorator class that just kind of attaches some data to the user about how that user should be displayed. So in this case, it has information about the tags the user has followed. It has information about the colors that they are using in their profile. And so what we want to do is find this line, which is line 95, where this error is being raised. That's this. And it's saying undefined method. I don't know if you can see that. That might be a little small. Undefined method modulus for nil class. That means that this ID object is nil. So let's see. So in this case, ID is referring to the ID of the user. And what I'm wondering here, so we don't want to actually create a user in the database called deleted user. That's just probably not a pattern that we want to go with, because then what would happen if that user got deleted? The catch here is that if we do not create the user in the database, it will not be assigned an ID. So the problem that we're dealing with here would be the problem we're dealing with here, is that we're supposed to be taking the user's ID and doing this operation on it to decide what color to assign to them. Unfortunately, this user doesn't have an ID, so we have to figure out another option here. And so there's a couple things here that I don't fully understand. One is how this bitwise or equals operator happens. Bitwise or is a little bit confusing sometimes. So these are all hex colors, by the way. I don't know if you guys have seen a lot of CSS before, but these series of characters are how you indicate colors. So these are just color sets. You know, if a background is this color and the text is this color. In this case, these are possible backgrounds when the text is white. But assigned colors. So the first thing I'm going to do is check out this bitwise or equal operator. So this is going to give us some information. Bitwise or is one thing that I've had explained to me many times and still makes no sense. So it just creates, in this case, it creates an intersection of a union of the arrays, but with each value only occurring once. So one thing that occurs to me that we could do is that we can just see what happens when we do this. Oops. And then we're going to go here. So A is the white colors, B is those. So let's see what this did. I think it's going to do the same thing, get a union of the arrays. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3. Yeah, so that, yeah, okay. Just gets a union of those arrays of hashes. So, and then the next thing that it wants us to do is, this is a way of picking randomly. So let's see if we can, no, that's not what I meant to do. CD, oops. So let's try running that. Spec again. So that worked. So here, in this case, what I ended up doing is, and I'm not sure I like this approach, is that instead of taking the ID modulus 10, I'm saying take the ID modulus 10, and if the ID is nil, then instead use a random number between 0 and 100. And take the modulus of 10 of that. So hopefully, yeah, I'm not sure I like that approach. And the reason why I don't is because of a number of reasons, but part of it is not knowing which range the random number should take. I mean, the ID could be anything, so, I mean, could be any integer, so it doesn't really matter, but I don't like situations where it's not clear what you should do. Still, I think this is what I'm going to go with for now. So let's take a look and see what happens now when we go and visit that making progress. So we are not getting an error, but we're also not really getting what we want either. So let's see, what do we want to do next? We need to figure out what's going on with this profile picture. So profile image.new. Let's check out what this profile image class does. So this is odd because it should be using this backup link when you don't have a profile picture. Let's see. At least that's what I think. So search profile image URL. So this is a little bit strange. And I'm going to take a look at the spec for this. It apparently doesn't have a spec. It might need one. So let me see. Sometimes when you're writing issues like this, you do end up making additional specs for things just because For example, what's happening here is that this is saying that that either the image link or the backup link should be used. So the image link is going to be the user's profile image URL. In this case, this user doesn't exist and it only has a username, so that is going to be nil. So consequently, what we would expect to happen is that this profile image that's not showing up here would be coming from this backup link. So that means one of two things happened. Either this code is failing, or there's some kind of protection on this resource that doesn't let our domain fetch it. So let's actually take a look at the dev tools and see which of those happened. Oh, yeah, that's the alt text. And so let's go to network. Let's refresh the page. And we've got a few things going on here. And then this is the script. Okay. So what seems to be happening here is that it's the server that fetches this is returning a 404 on it. So so that's actually not an error that's going on with us. Okay, so in that case, this is looking good. As far as what's on the template, or what's in this partial view, we've got the profile image, we've got the user's name, the user's username as the alt text. We've got the user's full name. So probably what we're going to want to do is also give this user a full name of deleted user. And I think what we're going to also do aggregate failures is a thing that you can use in our spec that makes sure that every expectation runs even if the first one fails. The default behavior is if I have these two expectations here, then say this one fails, this first one fails, then the second one won't run. Using aggregate failures, I can make sure that both expectations run. So that's what's going on with that. And again, we expect this to fail this time. Cool, so it shows us what all the output actually was. Let's see. So, and I wonder, maybe we want to include brackets around this too, so that the user, so that you can see that this isn't a normal user and that's not just a name that they picked for themselves. I mean, I guess a user could pick a name with brackets too, but we'll go with the user experience idea that they wouldn't. So that, we'll run it again for the sake of just staying on top of everything, but it should fail again for the same reason. Yep, expected it to include this deleted user. So now we're going to go back to UserTag. See what this does. All right, it passes now. And let's take a look again and see. Yep. Where's that link headed? So that's a problem. I'm wondering if we should have a default path for that user that's not their name, or not their username. I wonder if that logic is going to be defined in the user model. Okay, so path. Okay, so the path isn't actually an attribute on the user model. It's actually a method that that gets called that uses the username as the URL. So we're going to get some issues if we click on this. So let's see. We've got a few different options here as far as what we could do. So one thing we could do is that we could change the path method so that if the username is deleted user, then the path would be something different, would be the root path or something. We could also change it potentially so that this link is not rendered in the template if the user is a deleted user. And I'm not sure that which one of those I prefer yet, or if there's a third option. So I think what I'm going to do for now is take a quick break. This video is already 40 minutes long, so maybe I will call it a day for this video and see you in the next one. Talk to you soon.